Here it comes, the fascinating layer-by-layer description on how the illustration for the play An Inspector Calls was conceived and produced. It all starts with pencil sketches. This first one shows the interior of their elegant house, and the inspector's at the door, but their lives are shattered, as is this picture, by his appearance. There's a certain character in the play who dies of being poisoned. We know this at the beginning. It's not a spoiler. But what we don't know right at the beginning is that everyone's lives touches each other's, and some touch each other's with poison. The third one was actually my favorite. I like the hidden picture aspect of this. The well-to-do family industrialists are enjoying their port, celebrating a wedding announcement. And when this looming death comes over them that's brought about by poison, you could see the poison bottle positioned between the glasses of port. Don't do this at home. Always keep your glasses of port well away from the bottles of poison, especially if there are children about. As it turned out, the people putting on the show didn't like the idea of showing off the poison. They said, make it about the house. So that brings us to the fourth option, the house. A house. How exciting is that? It's not. So I made the house, but it's being peeled back by the good inspector, showing all the evil and darkness that lurks within their hearts, and our hearts as well. The house was accepted. Hurrah! My next step was to get some photos of houses from the age, and I got several, and I made my own house from that. So here we have a blank page of Illustrator. Not very exciting. Time to put stuff on it. And now we have stuff on it. Not very exciting at this point. It's just an outline of the brick area of the house and the foundation underneath. You'll see some gradients are in there. I'm going to use gradients a lot. That just helps give depth. There's the foundation, the main brick part, and there's a shadow kind of in the middle. That was actually put in later. It's a brick house, so I'm putting bricks on it. I don't want to put every single brick in there. I'm just going to give an idea of the texture, and you'll notice there are like holes in it. That's where the windows are going to go. We don't put bricks in windows because then they're called wall. We've zoomed back out and added windows. Actually, one window multiplied a lot of times. Hey, it's easy. I wanted to give a feeling of antiquity, so the lights aren't coming from the ceiling. They're coming from where candles might be. Here, I've added the door, and that shadow around it is starting to make more sense. Rather than make just a slab of white, I added, yes, more gradients. Gradients in the panels, gradients in the light source from behind. You'll also see in the lunette window at the top that I didn't quite make the spokes go all the way out to the edge like I should have. Oh well, nobody will see that. As the English upper middle class weren't fond of hopping up to the front door, I decided to put in stairs. What the heck. Completing the entry is the portico, and what a lot of fun that was to make. It's just a study in geometric figures, cutting them apart, sticking them back together, adding gradients and shadows and various hoo-has. But sometimes hoo-has are what it's all about. Nothing says you've made it like a really big door area. We just zoomed back out so I can now introduce the roof. Now it's a house. You'll see I put a chimney on. I only put one chimney on. This should have two. That's the style of the day, but I have a special treat in store for this house. Surprise! It peels back to expose the darkness and corruption that lurks within the souls of us all. Next, some foundation plantings, followed by the earth and some shadows. This is not a show about a flying house. We have to put it on the ground. So far, it's just sitting in the English countryside until we put in a fence. We need that fence and a gate, but let's open the gate and close it and open it and close it and open it. Oh, what fun we're having. I decided to leave it opened so that the inspector can come into the house. This kind of gives us a feeling of something is happening. Why did I make the closed gate in the first place? Because it's easier. What I did was I did it that way, and everything is nice and evenly spaced, and then I used a compression and a perspective tool and made the open version. Have you ever seen pictures people take and the sky looks this color in the middle of the day because their camera is being fooled? Yeah, that's what this picture is doing. The house is too bright and the sky looks just wrong. Stars help a lot. But the house needed to look duller. So I made an overlay, a blue overlay in the shape of the house, slapped it on top of the house, and gave it some transparency, and now it looks less daylight-ish. Unfortunately, it still doesn't look right, and I realized that's because the windows were dulled down too. The bright areas should remain bright. So I copied the windows onto another layer, brought them above the overlay, so they're sitting on top of it. Now we have a complete stately house in the middle of nowhere. The script calls for it taking place in Brumley, an industrial town in the northern Midlands. Well, being a stickler for detail, when I think about it and care about it, I decided I would find a skyline of Brumley and put that in the background. Couldn't find one though. Turns out Brumley's fictitious, so I used Birmingham, got rid of the more modern looking buildings, although some pretty modern looking ones are still in there, and I put that in the background. And now it's done. Oh, except for one thing, a human. A human makes it seem more human. So the inspector that calls is at the front door waiting for someone to answer. At this point I thought I was done, and I showed it with great pride to the marketing director, and she said, "That's great, but don't you think it's a little clean, a little sanitary? Don't you think it needs to roll in the mud a little bit?" And indignantly I said, yeah, you're right, as usual. So I picked up the whole thing and plopped it into Photoshop. Then I found some mud for it to roll around in. This is a photograph of some old paper or something. Obviously the paper can't just sit on top of it because all you see is the paper. But fortunately, you see all these things on the sides of this frame. These are ancient hieroglyphs. No one knows what they mean. They come from the Adobe tribe, but some of them have magical powers. In the layers palette, this is layered over the top of the original picture. There are lots of ways you can tell the layer to react with what's underneath it. They're all just gibberish, and the best way is to go through them all and see what you like. In this case, I used an effect called hard light. See? Gibberish. And what it gave me was something that looked like I had put a house through a Vitamix. Pretty cool, but a little too much for what I'm looking for. So I toned down the opacity, so the overlay is doing less of what it does. So here we are with the same overlay at 34% opacity. And that's got a nice texture. I like it. It's not deep and gritty enough, but when I boosted it up more, it had more of that wild flavor. I just want it to be darker. So I duplicated that paper that I already had, and I made it darker. Eventually, I erased out a little bit where the inspector is so that he pops out a little. So I've got this, and I'm going to give it a quality to the layer that's called multiply. So everywhere there's a lighter gray, it'll make what's underneath it a bit darker, and where there's a very dark gray, it'll make it a lot darker. Let's see what that looks like. Well, it's certainly darker. It's a lot darker. It's kind of spooky darker. This isn't a vampire show. We don't have Christopher Lee waiting behind a bush ready to leap out and impale his fangs upon the flesh of a young innocent. So let's ramp it down a little bit with the opacity and get it to where we like it. And there it is. Let's go back to the original paper layer, and here's what we added onto it to give us pretty much the same thing, but a little bit darker. That's what I was going for. Now we're only lacking one thing, and I'll let you guess. So here we are. It's in England. It's dark. It's spooky. What do we need? Yeah, fog. So I whip out my digital airbrush tool. That's over on the left side of the palette. It looks like a pencil right now, but if you click on it, it toggles back and forth. I used a bit of light blue, a bit of white, sprayed all around. Use the eraser from time to time. Always being careful of that upper left corner of the house. I don't want to get the fog in that place where the roof is peeled back. But I do want to get some of the fog behind that, so it gives it an area to pop out from and be more noticeable. Unfortunately, now the fence has disappeared. We need the fence there. It gives depth. The open gate draws us into the show. So I'm going back to Illustrator. I'm copying the fence and putting it in here. And now we have a nice black fence. In fact, the fence is now the most important thing in here, but it's not a show about the fence. It's like the fence isn't even the second lead. At no point does the heroine open an upper story window and, in despair, fling herself upon the cruel finials of the fence below. So we just knock back the opacity a bit, and voila, we are done. One last thing I'd like to do is zoom in here, and you can get a better look at the full effect of all the overlays, etc., and the kind of grungifying the house a bit. You know, it's still genteel, but it's kind of worn, like the souls of the characters of the play. Another thing I'm noticing is those bricks that I spent so much time putting on here have completely been obscured by the effect. I can't see any trace of them. It's like they went to brick heaven or something. Anyway, I hope you could see the show. It opens February 19th, 2016 at Pioneer Theater. Enjoy.